So many men have been sold the lie that showing your true feelings makes you weak. In today's video, we're going to debunk the myth that vulnerability is a sign of weakness and explore how it's actually a cornerstone of authentic living and genuine connection. Let's dive in. For many decades now, vulnerability has been viewed as a sign of weakness, and particularly within men. We've been taught to stuff it down and push it deep whenever you're starting to experience a challenging emotion. And that's led to the most dangerous rule of men. If you're struggling, don't talk about it. And that bullshit rule is something that we need to individually and collectively address so that we're not continuing to suppress our problems and think that we need to deal with all of our challenges on our own. When we buy into this bullshit rule, it forces us to push our emotions down and to not talk about and share the genuine struggles that we're going through in our lives. And that can lead to shame for thinking that we should have it all together, but can't carry that weight of it all alone. And the more we start to push it down and suppress these things, the more that will lead to symptoms of depression, anxiety, and any other challenging emotion, because what we suppress will be expressed. There's no way around it. So the only lasting solution is to go through it, to actually experience that, and to seek support for the places where, in the moments, that feels overwhelming. Media often portrays men as being stoic and being able to have it all together. And there's not many examples or models within mainstream culture that actually show men actively feeling out their emotions and expressing this in a vulnerable way to somebody else or asking for help. We're lacking role models. We're lacking a vision of what that actually looks like to be vulnerable in a healthy way. Moreover, there's peer pressure that a lot of young men face as they're growing up. And if they're the one that starts to lead with vulnerability, they're often told not to be a pussy or to suck it up, or men don't cry. What are you doing? That becomes internalized. And so rather than risk facing rejection, facing abandonment, it's easier to stuff it and hide it down, because at least that way, I don't have to look weak. This same kind of ethos has infiltrated the workforce, where showing signs of vulnerability is often seen as a liability. We're taught not to mix our personal emotions with business and keep all of that stuff out of the workplace. And so all we're looking at is this very hyper-rational, mechanistic way of going about things that totally leaves out and neglects a huge aspect of who we are. All of what I've just mentioned has directly impacted me throughout my life. I grew up playing all different kinds of sports, and in virtually every environment that I was in, showing any kind of emotion or expressing that I'm struggling in any way, shape, or form was totally frowned upon. And you would be ostracized and made fun of and targeted if you were the person to lead with vulnerability. And so for me, what that led to was taking my emotions, pushing it all down, and thinking that I just needed to suck it up and to move on, and created a shell on the outside where I looked like I had it all together. And by so many metrics, I was moving things forward in my life and experienced a lot of material and worldly success. However, internally, most people, if not anybody, actually knew the depth of the struggles that I was encountering in my life. I did not feel safe to fully express that, and thought that if I were to share something, there was a deep fear that I would be rejected or abandoned internally for expressing this thing. Again, these aren't even things that back in the day I would have even had the words for, but now that I've developed a sense of emotional maturity, to be able to look back and see how I spent most of my life just sharing details, ideas from my head up, where I could talk about the details of the challenges I was experiencing, but I never was able to bring it down to the depth of how my experiences were directly impacting me. I've been fortunate to surround myself with strong, like-minded men who are starting to peel back their armor and allow themselves be seen. And I've been able to do work with coaches and mentors in these spaces who've held space for me to be able to open up about the things that I was scared to share. As I did so, it established actually a deeper sense of connection, a deeper sense of relatability with the men that I shared with. So rather than my fear of that abandonment and rejection actually manifesting, it deepened my sense of feeling understood. It deepened my sense of safety, and it deepened my relationship with the people in my life. Vulnerability requires strength. It requires honesty, and it requires a tremendous amount of courage, especially when we're the ones leading with that in our relationships. One of the best quotes that I think really highlights a practical sense of vulnerability is The Man in the Arena by Theodore Roosevelt. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who never knew victory nor defeat. This quote really reminds me that I will never achieve my highest potential in life if I'm not willing to risk being vulnerable, if I'm not willing to start to peel back the layers of my armor and take a chance in life, to lean into my growth edges and allow myself to be seen, flaws, fallibility, and all. And the weird paradox is when we see vulnerability in somebody else, it looks like strength and courage. But when we think of revealing our own vulnerability, it feels like weakness. And this is a mindset and a mentality that we need to be able to get over. The more we suppress the things in our lives, the more we're going to experience shame. So the more that we can actually speak to our challenges and speak to the things that we don't even love about ourselves and be seen and be held in that by people that love and trust us, shame will start to evaporate. The weights that we've been carrying, the burden, will start to feel lighter. Now let's look at 4 practical steps that you can take to embrace more vulnerability in your life. The first is to develop a deeper sense of self-awareness. That involves doing some inner excavation work and really starting to look at where your fears lie, where the negative self-programming is, and start to sharpen your awareness of the barriers that you're encountering in life. Great ways to practice this is to start journaling. Do some reflective journaling, be that in the morning or take some time at some point in your day. Make it intentional and actually lean in. And for me, when I write, sometimes the first couple pages are crap. It's about actually getting to the point where you can get out of your own head and the pen starts to flow. It becomes, for me, what I call my writing meditation. And so once I'm a page and a half or 2 pages in, something starts to shift for me and I'm able to drop into a deeper place. Another option could be just going in for a walk and going outside in nature and starting to reflect on where I might be scared, where I might be holding back in my life, where I might be playing it safe because I'm scared of being seen. This is a great place to start. And the reality is that the greatest fulfillment that I can experience and the biggest dreams that I want to accomplish are on the other side of my greatest fears. So the more that I can start to develop an awareness of the things that I'm scared of and the things that I'm actively holding myself back from experiencing or being witnessed in, that's going to provide the transformation. The second tool is self-regulation. Starting to develop our capacity to be able to regulate our nervous system. As I develop more self-awareness about the challenges and the fears in my life, that's going to inevitably stir up more internal conflict. And the invitation there is to bring the awareness back to my direct felt experience. What is happening in my body? Can I start to notice where I'm experiencing a charge in my body? What is the quality of that experience? Perhaps some tingling or contraction in my chest, or tension in my shoulders or in my jaw. Maybe there's some clenching. Starting to actually name and notice what that experience is like, and to also notice the intensity of that experience. On a scale of 0 to 10, how intense is this charge in that moment? So if I've got some contraction in my chest, and right now it's an 8 out of 10, something's coming on in my life and it's really stirring up something. There's power in just being able to name and to notice our direct felt experience, and to also notice the variability within that. Because sometimes when we're in the heat of an intense experience, it can feel like that's something a bit more permanent than it truly is. And so noticing the variability of the intensity of our experiences will help us in the moments where that intensity is cranked up on high, so that we can know that this is impermanent and that I have the tools and I have the capacity to be able to be with this in that moment. And speaking of tools, being able to regulate your breath is absolutely critical for developing your ability to regulate your emotions and the experience of your emotions. One breath that I find extremely effective for down regulating the nervous system, particularly when it's in that sympathetic fight or flight kind of state, is the 4-6 breath. So you could take a 4-second inhale through the nose, hold for a couple seconds, and then exhale through the mouth for 6 seconds. And again, maybe pause at the bottom of that for another couple seconds. And then inhale for 4, slight hold, exhale for 6 out the mouth, slight hold, and continue that rhythm. If you do that for even 2 minutes, let alone 5, especially when you're experiencing that stronger intensity, I'm sure that it will help you start to feel a deeper sense of presence in the moment and a better capacity to be able to hold space for all of what's coming up for you in those moments. The third thing that I would really recommend is leaning into discomfort. That means taking intentional steps within our days to challenge our growth edge. Do something that's uncomfortable. Do something that's hard. The more that I intentionally expose myself to stress and discomfort, the more I'll be prepared for it when it happens. If I'm not intentionally exposing myself to discomfort, and the stress I experience within my days is greater than the stress that I'm intentionally exposing myself to, I'm going to experience suffering because I'm not prepared. I don't have practice around being able to hold space for this. That is why we practice. That is why athletes practice, is so that when the actual moment comes up, we have a direct felt experience that we can lean on within those moments. The fourth tool is to practice open and honest communication with trusted friends and family members. One of the ideas that I really like to lean on and practice is leading with vulnerability. And I think most of us genuinely desire deep, authentic, honest connection with other people. And most of us are scared of it. So in my experience, as I start to open up, as I start to be the first to say the thing that I'm scared to say, or do the thing that I'm scared to do and be witnessed in that, all of a sudden that becomes reciprocal. I start to be met with more vulnerability on the other end. Rather than being shut down or pushed away, people tend to actually open up themselves within their posture. I can literally feel it within that connection. And so the invitation is for you to cultivate the courage to start leading with vulnerability, even in small baby steps, and just start to notice how that shifts your relationships. And simultaneously, if you start leading with vulnerability and you are laughed at or humiliated, there's an opportunity there to assess if those friendships are really, truly serving you. And just remember that all of these things take time, consistency, and effort. This isn't an overnight practice. We've been taught to seal up and close off because that's felt safer. And so the idea of peeling back the armor and allowing ourselves to be exposed can be terrifying. It's something that I'm still working on myself, and I'm continuously peeling back my layers of protection to allow myself to be seen so that I can show up in the way that I truly desire and develop the depth of connection that I truly desire in my life. The myth that vulnerability is a sign of weakness runs deep within our culture, and it's something that it's going to take time to unpack and move beyond. I know this is an ongoing practice and an ongoing conversation that we need to lean into. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you staying tuned and listening in, and I'd love to hear your perspective. How has it been leading with vulnerability in your life? Where are you at in this trajectory? Is it hard for you to open up? And if you have, what kind of values and what kind of benefits have you experienced in starting to share a deeper depth of what's alive in you? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks again for tuning in. This is Stu Murray signing off, and we'll see you next week.